Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Livestock Investment Grant webinar. My name is Stu Laurie. I work for Minnesota Farmers Union, and we are honored and excited to host this webinar in partnership with MDA and our fantastic panelists. We'll be on here for an hour, talking not only about details of the grant, but also importantly, tips for a strong application from former applicants and reviewers. So really appreciate your taking the time to join and hope this is informative and actionable as we near the application deadline for this grant. So uh, moving ahead, I'll talk through our agenda where we'll be today. We'll start with some introductions of our panelists. Then we'll get an overview of the grant from the staff who are responsible for administering that at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We'll hear from a farmer who's has experience in receiving this grant before, what their project looked like, and any tips that they have. We'll hear some tips for applications from a reviewer. We'll have time for Q&A in this webinar. We'll use the Q&A function, and then we'll wrap things up no later than 1 p.m. So without further ado, we'll share some introductions. I'll start again. My name is Stu. I work for Minnesota Farmers Union. I'm excited that we're able to host this webinar, not only because we got to work on this program, some at the legislature with the leadership of Farmers Union members and others, but also because I think that livestock and livestock operations are central to a resilient farm economy and resilient communities. So next, I'll turn it over to Tessa for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa Parks. I'm the Rice County Farmers Union President, as well as Conservation Ag Coordinator at Clean River Partners here in Northfield, and we're joining you from our pasture over at Showing Our Roots Farm.
Perfect. I believe I'm next. I'm Courtney Vandermay. I am a grant supervisor with the Minnesota Department of Ag. Today I'm here to talk about the grant program and what the application involves. Just a little bit about me. My family has a small cattle operation and then a very small flock of sheep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Ripka. I'm MFU County President, and I'm a former reviewer on the livestock grants. We used to milk 250 cows, sold out in 2019. And so now we've built a house on our other land, and we have a small herd of beef cows.
Hey everyone, I'm Jonathan Kilpatrick, former grant recipient on the Livestock Investment Grant. We farm just outside of Alexandria, and we raise pasture broilers, and we do a sheep and goat operation as well.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So appreciate your partnership in this. And we've got some other Farmers Union staff on the call. We may rely on their expertise as well. But, why are we having this webinar? Not only because the Livestock Investment Grant is a long-time keystone program within Agri that helps farmers reinvest in their livestock operations, but also because Farmers Union and other organizations, the leadership of our members, made some changes to this program in partnership with the legislature and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So I want to give a big shout out to Representative Nathan Nelson, who's pictured there on our member Hannah Bernhardt's farm. She brought this up at a Farmers Union convention along with others that we should make some changes to the Livestock Investment Grant program. He was kind enough to lead on that at the legislature, as was Senator Rob Kupek from Moorhead. He spearheaded that effort in the Senate, And this past legislative session, we were able to make some changes to that program. Those changes included expanding the definition of livestock, which Courtney will talk about more. And then importantly, and really what we were after, but expanding the program to allow for a 50% reimbursement of the first $20,000 in eligible expenses, then 25% up to the maximum grant of $25,000. So a significant change, particularly for those smaller projects, but also benefiting all scales of projects. And to talk about why we made that change and some perspectives on why that was important to get to the Capitol and advocate for this, I'll turn it over to Tessa, who was a testifier from Farmers Union who came to the Capitol and made the case for this change.
Yeah. So me and my spouse, Wyatt, own and operate WT Farms here in the Northfield area, raising geese and hay. And as beginning farmers and first gen farmers, along with anyone else in livestock, just that 10%, if you had a $4,000 project, relatively small in the grand scheme of things, you'd only get a $400 reimbursement. And for any of us who've gone through the grant cycles, and your time is worth a lot more than honestly we probably get paid for. So increasing that amount to then also be able to be not equitable, that's not the right word, but to be more appealing for a broader group of livestock farmers means a lot. Like, we're not quite in the space to be thinking we're like a better applicant for it. We'll probably wait a little bit, but bookmarking this to allow other folks in livestock and in Minnesota, just to boost our domestic market and give folks a chance to enjoy things like having a cow just kind of come up to you, I guess. Not to romanticize it, but this really highlights how sharing our stories and kind of standing up for what we need and communicating that can mean a great amount of change, just even past our own pastures. So.
Fantastic. Well said. And thanks for your leadership on this change, Tessa, and for taking time out of a busy day to provide some added context and from the field, no less. So thank you. And next, we'll turn it over to Courtney Vandermay to talk about more details of the project. Courtney, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, I won't introduce myself again, but thank you guys for having me on today. I'm really excited to talk about this grant, and thank you for your support in making those changes that I do think is going to be impactful to our livestock producers. So again, today we're here for the Agri-Livestock Investment Grant. Overall, the goal of the program is to improve, update, and modernize livestock operations through equipment purchases, physical improvement, or the purchase of facilities. Again, we mentioned it a few times. Traditionally, this program has been a 10% reimbursement, so this grant change is a big deal. The grant now reimburses 50% of the first $20,000 in eligible expenses and 25% after that, up to a maximum grant of $25,000. Later in this presentation, I will have an example of that max grant, but think of anything at any scale. So Tessa mentioned that $4,000. So now we're looking at a $2,000 grant rather than a $400 grant. So I do think that is going to be impactful. Grant award ranges between $400 to that max of $25,000. It is one grant per project, so you can't put in multiple applications for the same thing. It would only be awarded one time. And then the MDA this round has 1.4 million available for fiscal year 26 is what we're in. So eligible applicants. So to be eligible for this program, you must either be a resident of Minnesota, a business entity authorized to farm, or a unit of a tribal government. I want to pause at the business entity authorized to farm. So you could apply as your farm business, But what that refers to with authorized to farm is you're in compliance with the corporate farm law. So if you have not registered with that, I do encourage you to look at that. There is some Q&As about that authorized to farm piece. So note that you can apply as an individual or your farm business, but make sure you're getting that authorized to farm piece. Also, to be eligible, you must be the principal operator of a livestock operation in Minnesota and must sell at least $1,000 of livestock products annually, or normally would sell at least 1,000 of livestock products in a typical year. That normally would really, I want to emphasize the beginning farmer piece, because if you're just starting out, you may not have that $1,000 in sales. When you get to operation, would you be selling $1,000 worth? So I do not want to discourage beginning farmers, but because that they are definitely eligible. Just think about when you are operational, would you be selling $1,000 worth of livestock products? And that definition comes from the USDA. So what does this grant cover? I do want to say that this is not the entire list. This grant can cover so many things. So just think in broad terms of livestock infrastructure and equipment, but it does have to be specific to livestock. So again, eligible things, we're talking buildings and infrastructure related to livestock, fencing, watering systems, feed equipment. That could be a TMR mixer, forage equipment. So we're talking haying equipment, chopping equipment. So when I get to that, people will go, oh, can I purchase a tractor? No, because we are considering that a general use equipment, same with a skid loader. Well, can I get a farm shop? No, because that is not livestock specific equipment. So again, really hone in on that livestock specific equipment. Manure management equipment is also eligible. I've got a few others on the other side there, robotics, milking equipment upgrades, monitoring systems, scales, hydraulic chutes, solar to power the livestock facilities. But again, we're talking livestock specific, and this is not the whole list. So many people apply for things that I do not have listed here. Just think it's livestock infrastructure equipment, very likely is eligible. So this match, this is where the big deal comes in. We are reimbursing 50% of the first 20,000 and 25% after that. I could come up with some other examples. So say you have a $10,000 project, it'd be a $5,000 reimbursement. So then the question comes up, well, how big of a project to receive that full 25,000? So this example comes right out of the RFP, and on the next slide, I do have the breakdown of it. But in this case, they're doing an $80,000 project. For that first 20,000, it's reimbursed at a 50% level, so that's $10,000. So you've got 60,000 left, and that's reimbursed at the 25%, leaving a $15,000 grant. So the 10,000 plus 15,000 equaled that $25,000 grant. So, and I've got that broken down on the next slide as well. In this case, the grantee's cost of that $80,000 project is $55,000. I will highlight here that this is a reimbursement grant. No money is given in advance, so that in this case, you would purchase the item and then submit documentation such as an invoice, proof of payment. I'll get into that a little bit later. And then you would receive that reimbursement. So but that is the math to receive the 25,000, but it does not have to be that scale of project. Think of any size project in between. So priorities, beginning farmers do receive some points in the scoring rubric. I've got a screenshot of the scoring rubric coming up, but beginning farmers are prioritized, and a beginning farmer is defined as someone who has farmed 10 years or fewer. Additionally, there's generational transitions that would receive points in the rubric, production of livestock for kosher or halal markets, robotic milking equipment, and then applicants who have not previously received a livestock investment grant. Some important dates. This first one is the key one, because I know on the 13th at 4:05, I get phone calls of like, hey, I'm still trying to submit. It is a hard deadline. So applications are due at 4 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, November 13th. So that really is the key. I will say it again somewhere in the slides, but I want to make sure people know it is a hard deadline. I can't go a minute beyond that. Project work dates. This is another big question I get of, oh, I plan to do something yet this fall, or I did something this past summer. Can I be reimbursed? The answer is no. State grants are mostly forward-thinking grants. So what are you going to do in the next year, or in the next two? So in this case of this program, projects cannot start until likely March of 2026. So once a contract is fully signed. I do not want to put an exact date there because some people, paperwork wise, it doesn't come in quickly, but we've got a goal of projects can start March of 2026. So once all the paperwork is signed, your contract is ready to go. And then you can do your project anytime between then and December 31st of 2028. So you've almost got 3 years to complete your project. Expenses for your project must be incurred during that time frame, and anything outside that time frame is not eligible for reimbursement. Navigating applying. So first, I highly encourage interested applicants to visit the website. There's a lot of good information on the website. One being the request for proposals, which gives all the information for the grant program. It is a long document, I will say that, but it gives some really good details of eligibility, project examples. Towards the middle end is the scoring rubric and also a preview of the questions, so you can kind of see what you're going to get to when you get to the online portion. On the website as well, there is a review the online grant application guide that gives some tips of how the system works for applying. The other thing I really want to emphasize is the Q&A tab on the Livestock Investment Grant webpage. A lot of good questions have been coming in. So that page is full of good questions from applicants. So if you've got a question, I highly encourage you to look there first because there's a good chance somebody else asked it. So I want to make sure people know that that is an option. And then any question you send to me, you may not get the response immediately because I do have to post the Q&As out there. So note that there may be a little bit of a delay, but I will get back to you when I do have that question ready, and as well as it will be posted to the Q&A section. Once you've reviewed everything that you need to for applying, feel free to apply online. On the Livestock Investment Grant webpage, there is the apply here, and there's that link right under it. That will take you into the system where you can create an account if you don't have one, log in if you've done this before, and start filling it out. If you have any logistical issues with logging in, feel free to call. We can often walk you through that. So I mentioned that scoring rubric, very, very important, and I'm sure our reviewer panelists will mention this later, but this grant is a competitive grant, so not everyone will receive it. So then how do you determine who is getting a grant and who is not? So we have reviewers that that are experts in the livestock industry, in agriculture, different industry experts that review the applications. So what they're comparing it to is this application scoring sheet. So then you look at each question and say, like, project impact is worth 15. How do you answer that to reflect that 15 points? So I will let our review panelists later kind of talk about that, but I still want to point people to please check out the application scoring sheet. It will be your friend as you're filling out the application. Some of the question prompts. So I want to make sure people are aware of how the system works a little bit. So this is an example of one of the questions around farm safety. So you read it, does this project improve farm safety or accessibility on your operation? When you select yes, that drop down pulls down with the follow-up question. If you were to put in no, that will not come up and there will not be an opportunity to answer. So be sure if you have a response for a section that you are selecting yes and the drop down comes down so you are able to complete your response. Also, there is a budget input section. So in this section, you've got, I believe it's 10. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you have 10 lines to fill out. It might be 20. But you keep it within what is there, where you fill in the item, quantity, cost per unit, total estimate, and the source of your estimate. With that, you can see there's a star under the first item and the first total estimate. That is all that is required. You certainly can fill out more than that, but just to make sure that people are putting in an item and a total, that those are the two boxes that are required. So as you see stars throughout the application, know that that is a required field. Budget narrative. In this question here, you would justify your budget. So again, read the prompts. Explain how you came to the estimates in your budget. Explain how you plan to pay for it. How important is the grant for your ability to undertake it? So you've got 2,000 characters there. The, the other thing I want to point out is there's a few spots throughout the application to do an upload. So in this case here is an optional documents showing project cost or ability to pay. This may also include quotes and estimates, letters of commitment from financial institutions. You'll see there that there is only one option to upload. A question I get is, well, I have multiple things I want to upload. How do I do that? We are asking people to combine them into one file for this section. So that is one upload. That is why there's only one click there. So please combine those and then you can include them. Again, technical issues, feel free to reach out to myself or our MDA grants line, and we'd be happy to work through it. But that is how you would do it, is combine those documents into one. Here's another section with three options: optional supporting documentation. So you may attach up to 3 letters of support from someone other than yourself. It gives a few examples there. Each letter can be no longer than 2 pages. So again, make sure if you plan to, you've got those spaces there. Some grant writing tips that I am able to give that are available to everyone. Visit our website and you can review the grants and a list of previous grantees. Really read that request for proposals. I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure you understand how points are awarded, make sure your project is eligible, and make sure you have good cost estimates. So, and that's going back to the budget stuff. Start preparing early and have a plan. I know people love to apply at the last minute, but if you have technical difficulties on the last day, it may be difficult for us to be able to help you. So I do encourage people to start early. Make sure you're able to log in. Make sure you've read the questions. And then read those Q&As. There, again, has been a ton of really good questions. So that I want to be sure people have an opportunity to read those there, because questions have been rolling in they've been really good questions. Just a summary of what this timeline looks like. So we've got this application closing, then what happens? So first, to start out, the deadline to ask grant program questions is November 6th. So grant program questions will likely be what's posted out on the Q&A. I'm limited to responding to grant-related questions after the 6th. Beyond that, if you're having tech issues, happy to help with those. Please reach out if you're having technical difficulties with the application. Just anything related to the grant, the Q&A likely will stop updating after the 6th, like when the last post goes out on the 6th. On November 13th at 4 p.m., that's that big date that I keep saying, the application period will close. Again, 401, that's tough. So make sure it's in before then, because it will shut off at 4 o'clock. From there, the applications go into review. So again, we have people that are knowledgeable of the livestock industry reviewing these applications based on the scoring rubric. So once we've determined that, all applications will be notified by February 1 of 2026. From there, once you're notified, there's some paperwork that's in between before you can start. So that's where we've kind of given that month in there to get the paperwork kind of settled and in and make sure we've got all of our documentation signed. So awarded applicants would submit some pre-award documents, including an IRS Form W-9 to get you into our accounting system so would be able to pay you at the end. And then also a document stating that the applicant is not suspended or debarred. At that stage, I also check if you're applying as your farm business, that it's registered with the Secretary of State, and that you are in compliance with the corporate farm law. From there, I anticipate contracts starting again March of 2026. Once I give you the go ahead, so I will email you, your contract is good here and signed, here's a copy of it. Feel free to start your project. That's when you can start making purchases. At that time as well, I give you reimbursement instructions and reimbursement guide just to make it easy. So as you're going through your project, you're saving those invoices and you have everything that you need to submit for reimbursement when your project is done. So just a synopsis on the reimbursement, proof of purchase and proof of payment. The MDA does have a reimbursement guide that is on our website. We are working to put out a new one. It is similar. So if you look on the website today, there is one there. There's a new one coming out. It is very similar, just with some updated dates and such. So review that reimbursement guide and know what you're looking for. So you would purchase your eligible items and services that are on your contract. So keep in mind what you're putting in your budget now is what I base, if you are awarded, what I would base your contract on. So once you've purchased those, you're going to save the invoice or receipt, save that proof of payment. Proof of payment looks like a cleared check, zero balance invoice, bank credit or loan document, something showing that you purchased what you were contracted for and you paid for what you were contracted for. Once you submit those documents and any required report, it may just be like, how did your project go? There is a small reimbursement report. Once that is to the MDA and you say you've done your annual report for the year, then you would receive your reimbursement based on what you submitted. I do want to note that grants are considered taxable income, so just keep that in mind as well. Those are the slides I have. I'm excited to see what the panelists coming up have to say, but I am just going to stick around and be available. And thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Courtney, and thanks for your thoughtfulness and putting together that presentation. Much appreciated, and also just appreciate knowing that there's good folks that we can reach out to who are administering these programs with questions, and that helps others too. So before we go on to Jonathan, who will share a farmer experience, I'll just flag that folks can start submitting questions via the chat. If they occur to you and you want to get those down, we'll look forward to the Q&A after the next couple agenda items. But without further ado, turning it over to Jonathan, who can share his experience applying for and receiving this grant.
Hey, thanks, Stu. Hey, everyone. Again, Jonathan Kilpatrick here from West Central Minnesota, Alexandria area. So we applied for this grant in the fall of 2023, and we were awarded it. So just a little bit more history. That was the first time we'd ever applied for a grant. In all my previous farming experience, I hadn't really gotten to or had to get too much involved in either grants or some of the programs that are offered. So I was a little nervous. I just wasn't sure how it was going to go. Sometimes you hear stories of farmers that get involved in programs and they don't always go the way they expected. So I was a little bit nervous, but I'm pretty happy to say that the experience doing the grants through MDA has been pretty amazing. Like Courtney and her team and everyone just does a really good job communicating what's expected. The turnaround time for reimbursement, I think, is fantastically fast. I've always been shocked as when I submit for a reimbursement, how quickly I get a check in the mailbox. That really helps your cash flow out because like Courtney said, you do have to put out for the money. So that's one thing I would say is make sure you have the cash at hand, either from your operating loan or whatever you need to be able to pay up front for the expenses, and then you can get them reimbursed. So anyhow, we applied with the picture you're seeing here on the screen is what we applied for. It's a mobile range coop for our pastured broiler operation. And this is a 20 by 36 structure. It's, as you can see, it's a greenhouse type thing. And we move it every single day onto fresh pasture. And we can grow out about 550 birds at a time in a single batch in this structure. So really allows us to be able to produce a fairly high margin product at scale, which is really important. in today's ag economy, to be able to compete and to be able to get something off the ground at scale that really offers us the ability to derive enough revenue from the enterprise. And then you also see in the top right corner, we were able to use part of our grant for some sheep handling equipment. So since we're a sheep and goat operation as well, in this picture, this is this past summer actually working sheep and goats. We had about 200 head there with no handling facilities. We were kind of just putting stuff together with pallets and stock panels, and as you can imagine, a lot of physical manhandling of animals to do what you need to do, which it wasn't great for the animals, wasn't great for us, and it wasn't gonna allow us to scale where we needed to be. So we were able to buy this equipment, and let me tell you, it just has changed the whole operation. I now look forward to working animals, and I can get them in and treat them and do what I need to do very quickly. So I'm really thankful for the grant experience. I guess you can jump to the next slide. I think there's another picture of the handling equipment. Yeah, this is just another picture of us. And my two young boys, they're almost 7 and 5, can basically work this with me, which is a lot of fun. They enjoy it and get a kick out of it. So back to the application process, I guess my job here is to kind of tell you how it went. So I would just say, I would probably second everything Courtney said. Just really read through the RFP, make sure you understand the questions. And I actually have reviewed grants for MDA, some of the different grants that they offer. So I have experience on both sides as both an applicant and a reviewer. Yeah, just really pay attention and make sure you get it in on the deadlines. And then if you're working with contractors on a project and you have that start date, just if they want to get going, you just have to explain to them, hey, I have this thing I'm getting reimbursed, so you can't, start work or you can't make payment or on stuff until after that contract start date and your contract signed, and she gives you the thumbs up to start. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, because sometimes contractors can get, we got to go here. So I guess jump to the next picture is oh yeah, so there's the mobile range coop full of chickens this summer. And then the last picture, I think, is the brooder. So this is them all on the brooder, which was also a part of the grant. We use grant funds to help pay for this setup. So yeah, I'm just trying to think of anything else I should share, but I think it's a great program. I'm super excited that they've raised the legislature made the changes and raised the limits. That's going to be really cool for the livestock industry, to be able, especially help beginning farmers getting started. It's a good chunk of money. So yeah, I'll be around for questions. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but yeah, just yeah, I'll be around for questions, I guess. So
fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. We'll also go back to you if you have anything to build on the tips for applying. But next, turn into Stacy Ripka, who has reviewed these particular grants before. We've got other folks on the call who reviewed other grants and have tips. But Stacy, I'll also say here, and it'll be reflected in the Q&A, but MDA, Courtney, are limited in what they're able to share with us in terms of tips for applying. And that's for a good reason. It's because they need to be equitable to all grant applicants, because it's a competitive grant. And so, there are things that she might not be able to say if they're not already addressed in the public facing Q&A document. She'll take those, relay them in that Q&A after today, but having folks like Stacy or Jonathan on who've reviewed those, they can go a little bit more in depth and have more freedom to editorialize about what makes a strong application. So thank you, Stacy, for reviewing these grants, and thanks for sharing some tips with us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Stu. So it is, as you've probably heard, very important to review that application fully and know what you're applying for, know what you're asking to be funded. Make sure that that falls within the guidelines of the project. Also, tell your story. Give as much information as possible. What you're doing, what your need is. Be very descriptive on that. Supporting documents. Make sure you have your financial documents, your quotes. letters of recommendations, maybe from like a nutritionist or something like that. And as Courtney mentioned earlier, that scoring sheet, very important. I would make sure that you really go over that scoring sheet, not only to know your points, but to look at the description in that scoring sheet and make sure that you're meeting the criteria in answering the questions. I think one of the common mistakes are if someone doesn't feel that they need to answer a question, they don't answer it. And that's important that you answer all of the questions, especially as they, apply to you. And again, just make sure that you have every question answered and all your supporting documents. And then again, as has been mentioned, look at the deadlines. Don't start before the time frame, and you can't end after the time frame. So I would guess that them are the tips for me. Them are things that I know that jumped out at me as I scored before. I was really surprised at some of the information that was received and the lack of information that was not on applications.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. And I think for me, always important to remember when you're writing these applications, you're not writing them for a computer algorithm that's going to grade the yes or no's as much as you're actually writing them for Stacy or Jonathan or, a peer in the agricultural industry who's going to be reviewing your application and assessing its merit and talking about your project with colleagues. So the more information you can give a reviewer like Stacy, the better she'll be able to advocate for your project. So think about it like you're explaining it to someone who's a peer in your industry, and really the more details you can include, the better. I'll also call on Jonathan and maybe Ariel on our team, who I know has reviewed many grants. We have some examples of the questions that appear in the RFP, and maybe if you have anything to build on what Stacy shared, or also, just talk more about what would make a really strong answer from your perspective as a reviewer for some of these questions that appear in the RFP. Jonathan, maybe we can go to you first.
Sure. So I think, like Stu just said, tell your story. And I think really important is describe your operation before this funding, and then describe what life is going to be like if you have this project completed. That tells a really powerful story, just the impact of what this, it says it right there on the screen. What impact will this project have on your farm? So whether that's increased profitability, if you can put some numbers, the best grant applications will actually have someone has done their homework and they figured out either this is going to increase my margin on this enterprise by X number of dollars, or this is going to decrease the hours, the labor. Quality of life for the people and the livestock is important. Just measurable change is a really powerful story. And don't forget the human element. It's a livestock investment grant, but also people are very much in part of these operations. So if it makes your life easier, that's important too. So the other thing is those letters of support can be a really good thing for us as reviewers to look at. That helps us to know that you're connected with your bank, and sometimes the bank can verify, yes, you do have the cash to make the purchases up front, and then obviously be reimbursed accordingly by the MDA grant if you're awarded. And then if you have an agronomist or a veterinarian, I guess would be a good one in this situation, or an NRCS grazing specialist, or someone else in the livestock industry that knows your operation, because that's just completing that story. And as we read that, we get a better picture of like just how networked and involved you are, and how I guess more the legitimacy of your operation helps. So those are a couple things I can think of right now. Let Ariel go, and I'll probably think of some more things later too.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. So I'm Ariel Kagan. I work at Farmers Union. I lead our climate work and working lands program. And I have not reviewed this grant, but I've reviewed a number of other grants. And I think all of those are really great tips. I think it can be hard when you go to the application to figure out how to write about what you want to do. And so one thing that I've seen that I really enjoy reading when I'm reviewing a grant is how you came to this decision to invest in this way in your operation. So maybe you went to a field day, maybe you got to go to Jonathan's farm and see this setup that he has. And he said, I think I can do that on my farm. Tell us that. That's really helpful in understanding sort of the thinking that brought you to this moment where you want to invest more in your livestock operation. I also think, the department does a great job of finding reviewers who are familiar with livestock, but every farm is different. And maybe you're doing something really, really interesting and unique, or something like, I think honeybees are an eligible expense. And maybe it's a cattle producer who's reviewing the grants and it's really not familiar with how bees act as livestock and what kind of infrastructure you would need for that. So, really bring the reviewers along with you in figuring out why this investment from the state will help you to expand your operation and support the outcome of your farm. I think there's also questions about environmental impact, and that's one where you could perhaps look to resources from Sustainable Farming Association or the Soil Health Coalition to look at those principles of soil health, one of which is integrating livestock. And if you can weave that into how you tell the story of why you want to make this change in your operation, that can be a really helpful way to connect it to some of the other priorities from the Department of Ag and the state as well. If you're not sure, I think it's also a great opportunity to connect with your soil and water conservation district or another partner that's in your area, and they can help to sort of think about how to answer these questions and also provide a letter of support. If you don't already have that relationship, it's a good way to build a relationship with a conservation advisor in your area to make sure that you're sort of building the most successful application that you can. I think that's probably what I have to share. I think you also can always come to your farm organizations, whether that's Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, your commodity group, and many of us have experience either with this grant or with other grants and can often help to, maybe even review your draft or connect you with resources and make sure that you're getting what you need to build a strong application. So, Jonathan or Stacy, anything else that you want to add on like how to specifically answer some of these questions that we see in the RFP?
Yeah, two other things came to mind for me is make sure that, and I've seen this with a couple grants, there's a lot of different grant offerings from MDA. So make sure that this one is the one that you want to go for. For instance, I've seen a couple where now like Courtney said like there's an application for something that doesn't fit. So that's going to get, pretty much disqualified pretty quickly. Like you can't apply for a tractor with this one. So make sure that what you need, like there's some other really good grant programs as well outside this one. So kind of look through the MDA site, make sure that this is the one that fits your needs the best. The other thing is make sure that when you're doing your budget, it really helps if you can have like really good legitimate quotes from companies. So for instance, I'm reviewing some grants right now and someone just put a source for a quote on something, Facebook Marketplace. Well, okay, that's okay. You might be able to find something on Facebook Marketplace, but it really is helpful if you're buying a piece of equipment, if you can say, Midwest Machinery quoted me this for this, or, for this grant, it might be you're buying, fixing up some cooling system in your dairy barn. So having some quotes directly from those companies really helps. So two more things I thought about.
Fantastic. Great points. And I'll just reiterate, as someone who does things at the last minute, I would probably be writing my grant application, nearing that 4 p.m. on November 13th deadline. But I would certainly want to get a very early start on requesting those letters of support, connecting with partners who can help inform my application, and getting those quotes, because those are going to be really hard to do at the last minute. I'll also say for Farmers Union, I'm sure others too, but we often write grant letters of support. If you have, folks that you work with who are familiar with your operation, who can vouch for you, do reach out and we'd be honored to do that. So with that, we'll turn to our Q&A portion, and I'll try to route questions to the relevant panelists. And Ariel, what questions do we have?
Yeah, we've got a few great questions already, and I'll just encourage people to put questions in the chat in the Q&A function if you have them. So our first one is, if we submit, this is probably for Courtney, if we submit 2 invoices for 2 different pieces of equipment with today's cost, and the cost for the equipment goes up before the actual purchase, is the old cost used for the grant or the updated cost?
That is a good question. What you put into the budget in the application is what I base your contract on. You are locked into that dollar amount, so I can't give you any more money. And I understand it, so that's a tough one. But what you put in your application is what you would receive.
Great. And then sort of a follow-up, another question is, can we quote a new piece of equipment and then end up purchasing a used piece for less and still get reimbursed?
That is where I would have you, yes, I would have you communicate with your grant administrator. In the case of this program, it is me, like as you're going along, so your contract signed, you're ready to purchase, and you do find that better price for the same piece of equipment, like it meets your needs, it fits the intent, reach out. Very likely we can amend your contract to include that new item. But again, very important to communicate with the grant administrator before you make that purchase.
Yeah. And is it correct that, if you request for $50,000, let's say, and then you end up finding a piece of equipment for $30,000, that's okay. But if you request for $50,000 and you find something that you want to buy for $70,000, that's
Correct.
not work, right? So you can always adjust lower, but you're not going to be able to get additional funds for the equipment after you've been awarded.
Correct. Yes.
Great. Another question. So far, we've heard examples of poultry and sheep. Are there examples where niche livestock species have been considered, like elk, bison, rabbit? And what is livestock?
That is, I almost want to find it quick and put the full definition in the chat, because that is also something that was changed this last round. In the past, it was a very specific list that was in statute that only these things were eligible. It has expanded now, and I will attempt to put it in the chat. But it does allow for all those niche things that are, because livestock is now defined as animals raised for the production of fiber meat, an animal byproduct for sale as breeding stock, including but not limited to, and then there's this huge list. So yes, what you've listed there in that question are eligible. Project-wise, bison have been eligible, so that one is I am familiar with, and what people have applied for: handling equipment, fencing. But those other ones, those are new. Rabbits have not been eligible, but are now. So and elk have been eligible. I have seen fencing, but yeah, it's opening up a lot of new things.
I was just gonna jump in on that used equipment, because that was a question that was our case with that mobile range coop. When we put our grant budget together, we quoted the cost of a new one with all the equipment, and we were actually able to find a used one in the state that from somebody else for much less. So we ended up having extra grant funds to work with for things like the brooder. So yeah, it is possible. Obviously, I don't know how you anticipate what things are going to cost next year in this economic climate. So you just have to do the best you can, I guess.
That's what we have for submitted questions right now. Stu, do you want to ask more questions, or we can wait and see if we get a few more in?
Well, I was just going to ask one question of Courtney, because I know you work with a lot of MDA's other grants. And is there anything you want to say about layering projects, or how this might interact if we're applying for this grant and you also want to start processing on farm, or install cold storage or things like that? What's the best way to get familiar with those other grants, and what does it mean to apply for one? Are you still eligible for others?
Well, that's a great question, Stu. Thank you. No, you can apply for multiple grants with the MDA. So as Stu mentioned, there's this livestock investment grant, value added grant, meat, poultry, egg, and milk, preparing for extreme weather, protecting livestock. So I highly want to encourage people, if you haven't signed up for our email updates, to do that. You just enter your email. You would select, like, I would like to know about grants. Um, so that you would receive just the grant notices. Otherwise, you can select other topics as well that you are interested in. But with that, you'd get notified of all the grant opportunities that are available. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that it can only be one grant per project. So if you apply for livestock investment now and receive it, you could not apply for the same thing in, say, like the Preparing for Extreme Weather grant. State funds cannot match. State funds, you would only receive one grant per project, but you are eligible to apply for other grants. So say you want to start that, you want to start having cold storage for that you're going to store meat in, or whatever it may be, you're going to on-farm dairy process. You certainly can apply in the future for the meat, poultry, egg, and milk grant. In the livestock space, maybe you want to do something to help add resiliency to your farm against extreme weather. The Prepare grant's going to come out, I'd say, sometime this winter. So then you still would be eligible, just not the same items if you're awarded livestock investment.
Fantastic. That's super helpful and great advertising for those programs. I guess to build on that, could you also comment on MDA not only has grants, but also has other forms of financial assistance, including loans from the Rural Finance Authority and the like. What about those other types of financial assistance? Can those be layered, and where should folks find more info on those?
Yep. So again, encourage people to check out our website. Near the grants page is the loans page. So feel free to check out what is there. You can get a loan from the MDA and pair it with a grant. So there is no limitation with that match. And then a common question I get is, federal government is kind of in a holding pattern right now, but USDA Equip is a common one that I see people partnering with this. Yes, you can pair them together. I may ask for more documentation just so I'm not overpaying you, but you can get a federal grant and a state grant, and those can be your match.
Fantastic. Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Courtney, on the Ag Water Quality Financial Assistance Grant, does that also considered as obviously an MDA grant, but can you layer that financial assistance grant with one of these other grants, or are they all considered the same? Because we're water quality certified
Yeah.
financial assistance. So I'm just curious.
I'm not an expert on that program. If the money is state dollars, I'm confident in saying that you could not layer it. But I don't want to say that because I'm assuming state dollars, but I'm not as an expert on that program.
Okay.
Fantastic question. Stacy, did you have something to add? Fantastic. Well, we're nearing.
We have one more question from the audience, if there's time for that. So we got a question: is there a lifespan to the project? So is the producer required to use the equipment or infrastructure for a period of years? And what if they were to go out of business?
That one I'm going to defer to the Q&A. So if the attendee would be able to reach out to Farmers Union, otherwise it will be posted to the Q&A tonight. That is a very good question. Yeah, I would like to answer that one publicly.
Sounds great. And then we did, our colleague just put the link in the chat about if people want to be reviewers of this grant, they can, and that's a great way to learn more. But then we just got a question, can reviewers apply to the grant? Or
if you are a reviewer of that round, you cannot apply. So say you want to you're not going to make a purchase next year, you want to sit on it and be like, oh, it would be a really good opportunity to review grants. I do, and maybe it'll get put in the chat. Oh, yep, right there. You do have the opportunity to say like, hey, I'm interested in being a reviewer. That does not disqualify you from applying in the future. It just would disqualify you from applying this round.
And they do a good job of like putting out a conflict of interest. So even if like for some of these farm advisors or people in this space that are, if I have clients that are applying, I'm not going to review their grant because obviously that wouldn't look right. So I think, they do a really good job of putting a conflict of interest stuff out there and just making sure that the reviewers are clear enough away from that operation not to, so they have good objective information.
Fantastic. Well, that is a great segue to our final wrap up. If you have a last question, do throw that in the Q&A. We'll try to loop back and answer that before we reach our hour mark. But just reiterating some places to learn more. So do visit the website for the Livestock Investment Grant on MDA's website. You can find and share a recording of this webinar on Farmers Union's YouTube. Do look for it there and you can refer back. You can also certainly probably speak for all the panelists, certainly for Farmers Union. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can help relay questions or answer them or provide support. A reminder about the deadline and that it is at 4 p.m. So, be mindful of that 4 p.m. deadline. As Courtney reiterated numerous times, you can't do 401. And then finally, just another plug, and that link is in the chat, but to serve as a reviewer, if you're interested or you're a technical service provider who is working with farmers, do serve as a reviewer. It's a lot of fun. It's a great way to connect with other folks in the industry. And it's also a great crash course on what makes a strong application, and it makes you much better at advising folks or applying yourself in a future round. So with that, and barring any more questions, I think that's all we had to share. Panelists, any final thoughts, words of wisdom, caution, or otherwise for anyone listening in? Fantastic. Well, appreciate everyone joining, your interest in this. Thank you to Tessa and others who came to the Capitol to advocate for this change. Again, to our legislative champions and MDA for shepherding that through and making sure that we can continue to make improvements to these programs. They're important, and I look forward to hearing about all the creative projects that get funded this grant round. So thank you all for taking the time on a Friday, and hope you have a great weekend.